protagonist tropes. In the 5th year of his stay, a woman in white arrived at Fengqiao town. As she entered, a light snow began to fall, and the pedestrians couldn't help but stare. She was as beautiful as she was cold. 8 powerful guardians followed closely behind her. The town's martial artists immediately recognized her identity. She was Xu Qingran, the saintess of the Xianxiao sect. Our protagonist was in his courtyard chopping wood when he heard that name. And for the first time, his axe slipped and snapped. Soon after, there was a gentle knock at his courtyard gate. A voice that felt both familiar and distant came from outside. "Sir, may Qingran come in for a cup of tea?" He stood there in silence for a long time. Eventually, he walked over and opened the gate anyway. Outside stood Xu Qingran. Her face was unchanged, though her eyes held a depth far greater than they had years ago. Her eyes reddened slightly as she looked at him, whispering that she had been searching for him for over 100 years. He looked at her, then glanced at the 8 guardians standing behind her. "If you're coming to visit," he noted, "why bring so many people?" Xu Qingran replied softly that it wasn't her choice to bring them. She explained they were required to follow her. He frowned, knowing instinctively that such a statement meant trouble was coming. He welcomed her into the courtyard, but when the 8 guardians tried to follow, he gave them a single, sharp look. The gate slammed shut with a heavy thud. The expressions of the 8 men shifted instantly as they realized something terrifying. They found that they didn't even have the courage to try and push the door open. Inside, Xu Qingran sat by the stone table. She didn't ask how his years had been, and he didn't ask how she had climbed from the lower realm to where she was today. They both knew those 100 years couldn't have been easy. Once the tea was finally brewed, Xu Qingran held the cup in her hands and whispered that he hadn't changed at all. He looked at her and remarked that he used to only fear trouble from the mortal realm. Now, it seemed trouble from the spirit realm was brewing too. Xu Qingran couldn't help but smile, a look that mirrored her younger self. She looked just like the 10-year-old girl who once clung to him in tears. The smile lasted only a moment before exhaustion took hold again. She looked at him and whispered that she had come to ask for his help in saving her. Something had gone wrong within the Xianxiao sect. The master who had originally taken her away was gone. 30 years ago, a new sect master took over and conspired with the Heavenly Fate Pavilion to use her destiny's aura. They intended to open an ancient tomb. If she refused to comply, everyone in the Xianxiao sect would be killed. He remained silent for a moment before letting out a long sigh. He had known this was coming. Really? Being involved with someone who has a protagonist template never leads to anything good. She asked if he regretted opening the gate. He admitted he regretted it a little, but not much. Hearing this, Xu Qingran lowered her head. A small smile played on her lips. She knew that, deep down, he didn't truly regret it at all. Just then, the peace was shattered. A cold shout erupted from outside the courtyard. A voice declared that the sect master had issued an order for the saintess. She was to return to the sect immediately. If she continued to linger with this mysterious mortal, there would be consequences. They warned they would show no mercy. It seemed they couldn't even let her finish a single cup of tea in peace. He nodded, noting they had been there all along, and set down his teacup. Now that she had arrived, trouble was naturally not far behind. Sure enough, by noon on the 3rd day, the people from the Heavenly Fate Pavilion appeared. A middle-aged man in black robes arrived. He was far more cautious than the sect elders and chose to wait outside the formation. From 3 miles away, he bowed toward the courtyard and introduced himself as Zhou Fei, a deacon of the Heavenly Fate Pavilion. He claimed he was there to invite fellow Taoist Wu Zui for a talk. He asked if our protagonist knew that Xu Qingran possessed a destiny aura that was the key to opening an ancient tomb. A heavy burden for a cup of tea, wouldn't you say? Zhou Fei continued, claiming that since the destiny belonged to her, Wu Zui shouldn't interfere unless he intended to make an enemy of the Heavenly Fate Pavilion. Wu Zui replied that he hadn't planned on it, but since they insisted on bringing their threats right to his front door, things had changed. With those words, the atmosphere shifted and a heavy silence fell over the area outside the formation. Zhou Fei clearly hadn't expected such a blunt response. After a long pause, a cold smile finally crossed his face. He asked if Wu Zui truly believed he could defy fate itself. Hearing this, our protagonist simply looked up at the sky. He remarked that back when he was at the sunken vessel, he had heard people say almost the exact same thing. And later, as he noted dryly, every single one of them ended up dead. At that, Zhou Fei's smile slowly began to vanish. In the next instant, 3 bone talismans flew from his sleeve, expanding in the wind to form a massive array that blanketed the entire town. Above the array, the threads of fate intertwined. This was the Heavenly Fate Pavilion's signature technique for sealing and altering a person's destiny. The sky above Fengqiao town darkened instantly, leaving the townspeople feeling dazed and disoriented, as if their very senses were failing. It felt as though their souls were being pulled away. Xu Qingran stepped to his side and whispered for him to be careful. She warned him that this was a true manifestation of fate magic, something far more dangerous than simple physical force. He nodded calmly, then reached out and actually grabbed one of the threads of fate hanging in midair. Zhou Fei's pupils contracted in shock. Those threads were supposed to be formless and intangible, only movable by divine sense. Yet here, he was holding it like a common rope. He pulled it right out of the void and examined it, remarking to himself that this fate thing seemed rather fragile. With a slight flex of his hand, the entire array shattered on the spot. Zhou Fei recoiled as if struck by lightning, coughing up a mouthful of blood. He gasped that it was impossible. No one should be able to touch the threads of heavenly fate with their bare hands. Wu Zue simply flexed his fingers, finding it quite interesting to finally see how destiny and fate magic were actually utilized. He mentioned he was learning, which sent a chill down Zhou Fei's spine as he realized Wu Zue wasn't just resisting the spell, he was deconstructing it. To see a thread of fate once and tear it apart by hand was beyond the realm of geniuses. It was the act of a true monster. To Zhou Fei, this was art in its truest sense, and terrified, he didn't dare stay a moment longer, turning to flee as fast as he could. Wu Zue didn't even bother to stand up. He simply flicked his finger, sending a streak of invisible energy piercing through 3 miles of open sky. Zhou Fei, along with his primordial soul, his destiny plate, and his protective treasures, instantly exploded into a cloud of mist midair. He was erased from existence, leaving nothing behind. And after that day, a profound change came over the area. Fengxiao Town became utterly silent. No one dared to approach anymore, and even the passing birds went out of their way to fly around it. Our protagonist finally enjoyed some long-awaited peace, though he knew it wouldn't last, as Zhou Fei had sent a message back to Central State before dying. Sure enough, half a month later, 3 great divination masters of the Heavenly Fate Pavilion gathered to begin a ritual. They tried to calculate his origins, his fate, and the karmic bond between him and Shu Qingran, but the first master met a grim end. The moment he saw nothing but a vast void, he began bleeding from every facial orifice. The second master fared even worse. He didn't even have time to utter the words "beyond the realm" before his body shattered into a pile of broken bones. The third was the most tragic. He forced a vision of Gantang Town and saw a stone tablet reading, "Here dwells the immortal Wu Zue." Then, he went mad. The Heavenly Fate Pavilion fell into an absolute panic, leading the Pavilion Master to personally issue a direct and final order. The decree was simple. Wu Zue is not to be calculated, provoked, or approached, and any who disobey will be expelled immediately. It seems those people finally found some common sense, which is a relief. Meanwhile, we see Shu Qingran sitting across from Wu Zue. She watches him slowly refill the teapot as he glances at the sunset outside the courtyard. Softly, she asks what he plans to do next. He replies that he'll keep living here for a few more years, waiting until his attribute points make him so strong that no one can touch him. Only then will he truly feel at ease. When she asks about her own fate, he looks up and tells her she can stay if she wishes. However, he makes it clear that he isn't looking for a disciple or a saintess. Shu Qingren blinks, wondering what that leaves. He thinks for a moment and decides that taking in someone just to share meals wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Shu Qingran pauses for a second and then lets out a gentle laugh, the most relaxed she has felt since arriving in the spirit realm. And so, a new rumor quickly began to circulate through Fengxiao Town. "Have you heard about that lady in white staying with the mayor?" They whispered that despite her intimidating background, she acted more like a quiet, devoted wife whenever she was around him. The townsfolk marveled at the mayor's supposed charms, and when Wu Zue heard this, he nearly spat out his tea in shock. He considered explaining the truth, but then decided it wasn't worth the effort. People's tongues will always wag, after all. Better they suspect him of a late-blooming romance than realize he was an ancient physical cultivator. The former was far less terrifying. By his 10th year in the spirit realm, his strength had reached 55 points, constitution was at 25, and mana sat at 5. His divine sense could now cover 10,000 miles, while his physical body had ascended to a truly remarkable level. It was a level even he couldn't quite define. One night, while practicing in the courtyard, he casually threw a punch toward the sky. The result? A small passing star 10,000 miles away was instantly shattered by the sheer force of the air pressure. Watching the burst of fire in the heavens, he fell into a brief, silent contemplation. Wait, am I getting ridiculously overpowered again? Shu Qingran, standing under the eaves, watched him with a wry smile and remarked, "Mister, that sounds a bit like bragging." He thought about it seriously for a moment, which, to be honest, was a very Wu Zue thing to do. "Is that so?" he replied calmly. "Then I'll try to say things like that less often in the future." But his peace was destined to be short-lived, as a massive piece of news soon spread from Central State across the entire spirit realm. The ancient Earth tomb had appeared ahead of schedule, and one of the keys to its gate was the Heavenly Fate luck within Shu Qingran. Simultaneously, the 4 great powers, Heavenly Fate Pavilion, Great Desolation Holy Land, Wanyao Mountain, and Wuliang Sword Sect, issued a joint decree. Anyone providing the location of Shu Qingran and Wu Zue would receive a saint weapon. Those who captured them would be granted an entire province. The entire spirit realm began to stir. Wu Zue stared at the bounty notice newly posted at the town entrance and remained silent for a long time. Finally, he turned back to look at Shu Qingran and sighed. "I told you so. Getting involved with a vermilion bird template is a lifetime of trouble." Shu Qingran bit her lip nervously, looking at him as she softly asked, "So, what do we do now?" Wu Zue looked down, tore the bounty notice from the wall, and crumpled it into a ball before casually tossing it into a brazier. The flickering flames reflected off his face, which remained calm, perhaps a bit too calm, as he considered their next move. Since they were so desperate to find them, he decided it was time to stop waiting and stood up, brushing the dust from his sleeves. As he stepped forward, the ground beneath him cracked instantly, and Shu Qingran felt the world around her blur into a haze of motion. The central state was vast. For most cultivators in the spirit realm, it was a distance that could take a lifetime to traverse. But for Wu Zuwei, it was merely a matter of a few leaps, and half an hour later, they arrived at their destination. We see them standing before the mountain gates of the Heavenly Fate Pavilion, where the peaks rose like jagged teeth toward the stars. 99 observation platforms hung, suspended above a sea of clouds, giving the place a truly immortal atmosphere. There were no defensive arrays, no hidden ambushes, and no killing intent, only a single white-haired elder waiting for them. Shu Qingran glanced at the figure and whispered that this was Lin Sun, the master of the Heavenly Fate Pavilion. Wu Zuwei found the old man much more agreeable than Zhou Fei, mostly because he didn't start the conversation with a lecture. Lin Sun bowed deeply, greeting Wu Zuwei as a fellow Taoist and claiming he had been expecting their arrival for some time. Wu Zuwei looked at him curiously, wondering why a master of divination hadn't simply run away after seeing what was coming. Lin Sun offered a bitter smile, admitting that after a night of calculations, he realized no one could outrun Wu Zuwei's fist. Wu Zuwei didn't waste time with pleasantries and asked directly who had been behind the idea of the bounty. After a brief silence, Lin Sun confessed that the Great Desolation Holy Land proposed it, and Wanyao Mountain had agreed. The Wuliang Sword Sect had given their nod, while the Heavenly Fate Pavilion had been forced to participate in the scheme. Everyone believed Shu Qingran was the key to opening the tomb, but Lin Sun looked at Wu Zuwei with a deeply complex gaze. While the girl was indeed essential, the true reason the Earth Tomb had appeared early wasn't her, it was Wu Zuwei himself. Shu Qingran's expression shifted in surprise, but Wu Zuwei didn't seem shocked at all as he urged the old man to continue. Lin Sun took a deep breath and revealed that the ancient Earth Tomb didn't actually bury the Earth, but rather a fallen being. It was an immortal who fell from beyond the boundaries, whose death supposedly polluted the entire hidden Earth Sea before the spirit realm intervened. The ancient masters joined forces to suppress it, sealing it beneath the tomb, but now that the seal is loosening, the old man has his doubts. He suspected that what those sects were truly fighting over wasn't a treasure, but a massive amount of trouble, a word that caught Wu Zuwei's attention. Wu Zuwei immediately became much more serious, asking exactly when the seal would open, to which Lin Sun replied, "Tonight, at this very hour." The location was the Guishu Gate of the Hidden Earth Sea. Wu Zuwei nodded, though Lin Sun hesitated before calling out to his fellow Taoist. He warned that many would be there tonight, including the Lord of the Great Desolation, the Master of Wanyao Mountain, and the Wuliang Sword Sect leader. Even several old monsters who had been in seclusion for years would appear. While they might not be Wu Zuwei's match, the thing behind the gate was different. Lin Sun feared they didn't even know what they were facing, but Wu Zuwei simply noted that he didn't fear gods. He only feared things being hidden. After leaving the Heavenly Fate Pavilion, our duo didn't linger for a moment, heading straight toward the eastern edge of the central state. The Hidden Earth Sea sat where the sky met the water in a line of eternal darkness, and by the time they arrived, night had fully descended. The entire surface of the sea was as deathly silent as a giant coffin, and right in the center, something massive loomed over the water. A pitch-black ancient gate, 10,000 feet high, hung suspended in the air, covered in ancient runes that no living soul could still read. The four great powers had already arrived. To the east stood the people of the Destiny Pavilion, though they kept their distance, clearly waiting for the right moment. They looked very much like people who were only there to watch the show, unlike the Great Desolation Holy Land to the west, draped in divine light. To the south, the Wuliang Sword Sect filled the air with sword intent, so sharp it left hundreds of jagged cracks in the seawater itself. To the north, the great demons of Wanyao Mountain occupied the sky, their fierce auras blotting out the moon alongside countless hidden rogue cultivators. Demonic leaders hid in the shadows, everyone waiting for the gate to open at midnight. But the moment Wu Zuwei and Shu Qingran appeared, the sea fell silent. Every single gaze shifted toward them in an instant, whispering in disbelief that Wu Zuwei had actually dared to show his face here. They saw him as a mere monster who had ascended from a lower realm, and today, they wanted to see just how long his arrogance would last. The sea breeze was biting, but Wu Zuwei only looked down at the churning black water, noting that the feng shui here was quite poor. Shu Qingran asked softly if he was referring to the people gathered there, her voice barely carrying over the waves. He shook his head, clarifying that he meant the thing behind the gate. Just then, a brilliant golden light erupted. A middle-aged man in golden robes stepped out from the Great Desolation Holy Land, his aura as overwhelming as the sun itself. This was Ji Buchong, the leader of the Holy Land, who demanded that Wu Zuwei hand over Shu Qingran immediately. He claimed he could overlook everything that had happened before, but Wu Zuwei only gave him a brief, disinterested glance. The entire area fell into a deathly silence as Wu Zui calmly asked the man just who he thought he was. Ji Buchang's veins bulged with fury as he roared Wu Zui's name, his patience clearly reaching its absolute limit. He asked if Wu Zui truly intended to make an enemy of the entire world, but Wu Zui had been thinking of something else entirely. He explained that he had originally intended to have a quiet chat with them, but their tone of voice changed his mind. Their attitude made him lose all interest in talking. Ji Buchang laughed in pure, concentrated rage at the slight. The leader declared that he would personally test the skills of this so-called ascendant from the lower realm. With a wave of his hand, an ancient, massive cauldron slowly rose from the void, radiating a heavy, primordial power. The pressure from the vessel caused the spiritual energy for miles to collapse, even forcing the sea level down by dozens of feet. Someone in the crowd cried out in shock, recognizing it as the desolate heaven cauldron, the sacred treasure of the Holy Land. As the cauldron suddenly plummeted, the sky itself seemed to cave in, yet Wu Zui stood his ground without moving an inch. He simply raised his right hand and caught the massive cauldron with a single palm, sending 1,000-foot waves crashing outward. Despite the impact, his feet didn't sink even an inch, leaving the spectators speechless and Ji Buchang's face pale with shock. The leader stammered that this was impossible, while Wu Zui merely weighed the cauldron in his hand and shook his head. He remarked that it should have been sturdier before his fingers tightened, causing the desolate heaven cauldron to let out a piercing metallic shriek. Cracks began to spread rapidly across the metal as Ji Buchang spat out a mouthful of blood, letting out a terrified, desperate roar. He begged for Wu Zui to stop, but it was already too late. With a sharp, sickening crack, the desolate heaven cauldron was crushed right then and there. The artifact was utterly destroyed, its countless fragments falling into the sea while Ji Buchang stood frozen in complete, stunned silence. Wu Zui remarked that he'd keep a piece for boiling water later, and before the crowd could even process the shock, a sword hummed from the Wuliang sect. An old man in gray robes suddenly appeared, treading upon 10,000 swords with his hair fluttering and a murderous aura that pierced the heavens. He declared that such insults would not be tolerated, introducing himself as Xie Ding of the Wuliang sword sect before demanding Wu Zui's death. Looking at the sky full of blades, Wu Zui frowned slightly and wondered why all these sword cultivators had such a foul way of speaking. Xie Ding didn't waste any more words. He pressed his hand down, sending 100,000 flying swords raining down like a violent storm. The night sky was instantly illuminated as bright as day, yet Wu Zui simply stood his ground and slowly extended 2 fingers. With a gentle flick, those 100,000 swords seemed to hit an invisible, massive wall, coming to a dead halt in midair. In the next moment, Wu Zui clenched his fist, causing the entire river of blades to shrink and be crushed into a single mass. The swords were forced into a giant iron ball, causing Xie Ding's eyes to turn bloodshot as he cried out for his lost weapons. Wu Zui flicked his finger, sending that massive ball of iron flying back like a meteor towards Xie Ding and the 36 masters behind him. They were instantly reduced to a gray mist. The entire sword cultivator camp wiped out in a heartbeat. Just then, the black gate in the sea began to glow. Shu Qingran's face turned pale as she whispered that something was watching him, and Wu Zui felt it too. It certainly wasn't his imagination. The entity behind the gate was indeed staring directly